Like the video, subscribe, and comment your country below so I know who's listening tonight. Turn off the lights and put on headphones for the full horror experience. Let's begin the nightmare, if you're brave enough. I still remember the first day I arrived at Hollow Creek Boarding School, a massive, decaying institution resting at the edge of an endless forest that looked more like a graveyard of trees than a place meant for children to learn. And even though my parents believed that the strict environment would shape me into someone disciplined and successful, all I could think about was how the building's cracked windows and moss-covered walls looked like they had witnessed things too ugly to speak of, and how the thick scent of damp wood and stagnant air wrapped around me the way cold hands wrap around a neck, squeezing slowly. And no matter how many times the staff told new students that the surrounding forest was strictly off-limits, everyone knew that temptation was stronger than caution, because the stories passed from student to student about the things that lived beyond those trees were far more intriguing than math problems or morning assemblies, especially the story of the old school building that once burned down somewhere deep in the woods, where dozens of children had died trapped inside their dorm rooms when the fire spread faster than anyone could react. And some said that the fire was not an accident, that something, or someone, locked the doors from the outside, as if an unseen force made sure nobody escaped, and that those children never left the grounds, their spirits wandering restlessly, always searching for someone to take their place so they could finally rest. Which would have sounded like typical ghost story nonsense if not for the fact that every year, students disappeared, sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes more, always during the colder months when nights stretched longer and shadows swallowed everything, and the school administration responded with a rehearsed speech blaming runaways, accidents, or mental health issues, even though everyone knew that nobody in their right mind would willingly run away into a forest that stretched miles in every direction with no nearby town, no gas station, no civilization, nothing but rotting trees, silent air, and the unsettling smell of burnt wood that always lingered whenever the wind blew in from the north, a scent that made students cover their noses and teachers pretend not to notice, because the adults never talked about the old building, never talked about the fire, never talked about the children who had died, and most importantly, never talked about the fact that sometimes, late at night, students heard screams echoing from the woods, screams that were too human, too desperate, too real to dismiss as imagination. And though I was terrified of the stories, I couldn't help being curious, and maybe that's why I started hanging out with the only group of students who shared my obsession. Lily, a quiet girl with messy black hair who spoke in half-whispers. Noah, a fearless extrovert who believed nothing could frighten him. And Emma, the unofficial brains of the group, who always carried her old, cracked notebook filled with sketches of the school grounds and notes about the fire she collected from old library archives. And the four of us became inseparable, drawn together not by friendship but by a strange fascination with the dark histories surrounding us, especially when Emma discovered something that changed everything. A newspaper clipping from 27 years earlier saying that the fire had been started intentionally by a student, a young boy who locked the dorm doors and watched through the trees as the building burned, smiling, which should have been shocking enough on its own. But what made our blood run cold was the fact that the boy's body was never found. No remains, no ashes, nothing. And some students believed he hadn't died, that he never aged, that he still roamed the forest looking for new victims, a myth so ridiculous and terrifying that it became known as the burned boy. And while most kids laughed it off, we couldn't help noticing that every disappearance happened during nights when the forest smelled like smoke, and for reasons none of us fully understood, we began spending late nights awake, staring out the windows of our dorms toward the forest, waiting, hoping to hear something that would prove the stories true or false. But instead of screams, what we heard first was laughter, low, wheezing, broken laughter, drifting through the dark air like someone with a torn lung was choking on delight. And we froze when we heard it, because laughter doesn't belong in the middle of the night in a remote forest, especially laughter that sounds like it's being forced out of someone who hasn't used their voice in years. And Noah, trying to hide the fact that he was shaken, insisted it had to be an animal, maybe a coyote or owl doing something weird, but I could see in his wide, darting eyes that even he didn't believe himself, because the sound didn't echo randomly like an animal call, It rose and fell deliberately, like someone was trying to mimic laughter but didn't remember how humans were supposed to sound, and Lily whispered that she wanted to go downstairs and see if anyone else heard it. But Emma grabbed her wrist and told her that if the teachers woke up and caught us wandering the halls at night, they'd blame us for whatever was happening and we'd get expelled immediately. Which might have been the first time Emma actually sounded scared, because she rarely let anything shake her, and yet her fingers trembled on her notebook as if she was trying to hold herself together, and still the laughter didn't stop. It just grew louder, closer, until it sounded like someone was standing under our window, laughing straight up at us, and I didn't dare look down because I knew, with a certainty that made my bones ache, that whatever was outside didn't care whether we were curious. It only cared that we were listening, because curiosity isn't harmless around here. Not in Hollow Creek, not with the forest stretching like a graveyard's backbone. And that night, Noah did something stupid. He grabbed a flashlight, opened the dorm window, leaned out, and pointed the beam downward, expecting to scare off whoever was there. But instead what we saw made us wish we had never looked, because standing at the edge of the trees was a figure, thin, too thin, like the bones inside had been stretched, wearing what looked like burnt clothing stuck to its body in melted patches. And its head was tilted back, screaming with laughter, exposing a face twisted into something too damaged to express joy, a face where part of the skin looked melted like wax sliding off a candle. And Emma grabbed Noah's shoulder, whispering frantically to close the window. Close it now. But he didn't. He froze, and in that second, the figure snapped its head toward us with a crack, like its neck was breaking, and even though the night was dark, we saw its eyes, glowing orange, not like fire, but like burning coals buried deep inside a skull, and it stopped laughing immediately, silence dropping so fast that the crickets seemed afraid to fill it, and the thing raised its hand, slow and deliberate, pointing directly at us, and I swear on everything that matters that its fingers were burned down to almost bone, black, charred, barely covered in flesh, and Noah finally pulled back inside, slamming the window shut, locking it, stepping away so fast he fell over a chair. But none of us laughed, none of us even breathed, because through the glass we could see it still standing there, staring up, and there was something worse than its appearance, something more terrifying than its laughter. It recognized us, it wanted us, and it was waiting, patient, certain, because these woods had taken children before, and it didn't matter who screamed, fought, or ran. Eventually they all ended up here, and in that moment, every story we heard about missing students didn't feel like mystery anymore. It felt like prophecy, and that night none of us slept, sitting in the dark trying to pretend we weren't shaking while Emma scribbled notes in her book, whispering that the fire wasn't the end, it was a beginning, that whatever started it hadn't died, hadn't aged, hadn't stopped, and if it had waited 27 years to replace the dead, then maybe the disappearances weren't random, maybe they were ritual, maybe the forest needed blood, needed children, needed replacements. And when the first bell rang for morning classes, we stepped outside, exhausted, expecting the figure to be gone, because things like that aren't supposed to stay in daylight. But when we walked past the tree line, the ground was blackened, scorched, like someone had poured gasoline and lit a match, and in the middle of the burn mark were footprints, charred, barefoot, leading deeper into the woods, and each step looked like flesh had melted where it hit the ground. And Lily started crying, soft and terrified, because she realized the truth none of us wanted to say. It wasn't just watching us last night, it was inviting us, calling us, expecting us, and if we didn't go willingly, it would come back again and again, until one of us answered. We didn't tell the teachers what happened, partly because we knew they wouldn't believe us, but also because some of them already seemed to know something was wrong with the woods, judging by the way they avoided the windows at night and locked the doors early, like they had lived through something we were just now stumbling into. And that day, while we sat through classes trying to stay awake, Emma passed me a note that said she found archived newspaper clippings in the library from the 1997 fire, and that the students who died weren't just trapped in the burning building, they were chased into it, locked inside, and the reporters described the remains as incomplete and inhumanly damaged, as if whoever died burned from the inside out. And that detail stuck with me the entire morning, until after school ended, Emma pulled us all into the old computer lab, The one nobody used because half the lights didn't work and the power kept flickering, and she laid out photocopies of burnt photographs showing a group of students smiling at a campfire next to the exact part of the woods we saw last night, and in the background of one photo, faint but visible, was a blurred figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall, burned, watching, and Lily whispered if it was real or just a camera glitch. But Emma said the same figure appeared in 3 different photos taken by 3 different people at 3 different angles, meaning it wasn't a mistake, it was present, waiting, even before the fire, and that terrified me more than anything, because it meant whatever was in the woods didn't start with the fire. The fire might have been the first attempt to stop it, and if that was true, then someone in this school knew exactly what happened and chose to bury it, which made every smiling teacher suddenly suspicious, complicit, like they'd rather we died quietly than risk the truth resurfacing. And that night, after lights out, when we were trying to pretend everything was normal, we heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging, like someone's shoes were soaked and heavy, and Noah whispered that if a teacher caught us awake, we could say we were studying. But I knew no teacher walked like that. No teacher moved like something was peeling off their body with each step, and then the footsteps stopped at our door, and all of us froze when the doorknob rattled once, then twice, then slowly turned, even though we had locked it from the inside, and Lily covered her mouth to stop from screaming because she could see it too. Whoever was outside was strong enough to force it open, but hesitant, like they wanted permission, like they wanted us to invite them, and after a full minute of silence, the knob let go, the footsteps dragged away, and we heard someone whisper, faint but distinct, "Not yet," and then disappear into the hallway, and Noah, trying to convince himself we imagined it, opened the door a crack, but instantly slammed it shut, because standing at the end of the hall was the same burned figure, motionless, head tilted, watching and waiting, not trying to get in, just ensuring we saw it, confirming that we understood we were not safe, even surrounded by walls, floors, teachers, alarms. Nothing could stop it because whatever it was did not care about doors or rules or daylight. It only cared about pattern, ritual, and selection. And that night, after we finally fell asleep from exhaustion, we woke to screaming outside, and when we ran to the window, we saw flashes moving in the woods, not just one figure but several, burned, skeletal, staggering through the trees, chasing something or someone, and when the screams stopped, we saw a shape crawling out of the darkness, dragging itself across the grass like its legs were broken, leaving streaks of soot and ash, and it lifted its face toward us, half melted, mouth opening but too damaged to speak, and then someone pulled it back into the darkness like a hook pulling a fish underwater, and the only evidence it was real were the black fingerprints burned into the grass leading from the woods to the dorm, and we didn't sleep after that, didn't talk, didn't breathe loudly, because all of us realized the same awful truth at the same time. The thing laughing beneath our window wasn't alone, it wasn't a monster stalking us, it was the first of many, the one sent ahead, a scout, a herald, because something bigger was coming, something older, something that needed a new fire, a new sacrifice, a new generation of bodies, and we were trapped in the middle of its hunting ground with nowhere to run, nowhere safe, and no one willing to tell us what was waiting in the trees, because the adults were terrified too, just hiding it better than we ever could. By morning the school pretended nothing had happened, pretending that the smell of smoke lingering in the air was from a faulty oven and not from whatever burned in the woods, pretending the muddy footprints in the hallway were from a janitor and not from something that walked without skin, pretending the missing student, Thomas Keene, was suspended for fighting and not dragged screaming into the trees at 3 a.m. And I think what broke us more than the terror itself was realizing no adult would ever admit what we saw, because they'd rather protect their own sanity than save us. And when Principal Merrow gathered us in the auditorium, forcing a cheerful speech about unity, focus, and responsibility, I kept staring at his hands because they were shaking violently, like he had spent the night fighting something or burying something, and Emma leaned over and whispered that she overheard teachers arguing in the staff room, saying, "It's starting again. We have to contain it, and we failed last time," which meant they weren't confused by what was happening. They expected it, planned for it, and were more afraid of exposure than death, and when Merrow dismissed us, telling the seniors they had mandatory group study sessions until late evening, we understood the real reason. They needed us contained, indoors, monitored, like livestock before slaughter, because whatever came at night had a preference, age-specific, ritualistic, and it made me sick to think that someone in this building knew exactly who would die next, and were simply waiting for the bell to ring. And after classes, as rain hammered the windows, we met in the library, which echoed with that old smell of paper and mold, and Emma showed us a hidden folder she found behind the archives, filled with photographs and typed reports stamped "Property of County Special Response," describing missing students, unexplained burn patterns, witnesses who disappeared after speaking to the media, and a sealed warning. Do not approach the entity if it appears human. But what killed me was the final line. IT does not want TO kill immediately. IT wants TO be seen. And that explained the hallway, the window, the photos. These things wanted witnesses, devotion, acknowledgement, maybe worship, and as we argued over what to do, the power cut, plunging the library into darkness, and we heard movement between the shelves. Not footsteps, but something heavier, dragging, breathing painfully, like lungs filled with ash. And Lily whispered, "Don't run." But of course Noah ran, bolting toward the exit, except as soon as he reached the door it slammed shut by itself, locking with a click that echoed across the dark, and we huddled behind a row of shelves, listening to something move closer, the faint sound of wet, popping flesh, and when lightning flashed outside, lighting the room for half a second, we saw it clearly. A burned figure leaning against the shelves, reaching out blindly, fingertips leaving soot on the wood, but the face, God, the face, had eyes that glowed like embers burning inward, as if whatever was wearing that melted flesh wasn't the true creature, just a vessel collapsing. And as we crawled away, trying not to make noise, the thing whispered, broken but audible, "It's not enough," and then collapsed to the floor like a puppet with strings cut, twitching before going still, and Emma hissed that we had to leave now. But the library door wouldn't open, not even when we rammed it, so she grabbed a fire extinguisher and smashed the window, glass exploding outward, triggering the alarm, and we crawled through the frame, cutting our hands, landing in the rain-soaked courtyard, and as we sprinted across the grass, soaked, freezing, terrified, I looked back and saw something climbing through the broken window, not the body we saw on the ground, but something thinner, less human, moving backward like a spider, bending at wrong angles. And it didn't chase us, it just raised its head to the sky, letting the rain extinguish small flames burning across its body. And when the alarm forces teachers to storm the courtyard, shouting, panicking, pretending to scold us, pretending not to see the thing hanging from the library window, we realized they weren't trying to save us. They were trying to save the school's reputation, because every teacher looked at us like we were already dead, like we had seen too much. And that night, lockdown began, forced curfew, teacher patrols, security cameras installed in the hallway overnight, as if metal and wires could stop nightmares, and after midnight, when everyone else finally slept or pretended to, Emma, Lily, and I snuck to the second floor, where a broken window overlooked the woods, and we watched the tree-lean pulse with orange light, flickering like flames, except no fire burned. Something was glowing from beneath the soil, pushing upward, breathing like a sleeping giant, and Emma whispered that maybe the fire didn't kill them in 1997, maybe it opened something, released something, and now it wanted more, and that's when we saw headlights approaching the school, 3 black vans, no markings, no plates, like the place was being raided by ghosts with guns, and men stepped out wearing hazmat suits and gas masks, carrying flamethrowers and tranquilizer rifles, moving toward the tree line without hesitation, which meant they had done this before. And when the first creature emerged from the woods, crawling on hands that were too long, the men didn't scream or panic. They opened fire with burning jets, turning the thing into a writhing torch, but even burning, it kept moving, kept crawling, kept trying to reach them, until one man, clearly terrified but trained to hide it, whispered into his radio, "They're regenerating faster tonight," and I realized the awful truth. The woods weren't cursed, they were under containment, a biological hazard, and everything that died refused to stay dead, evolving, strengthening, becoming more resistant, and we were trapped in the middle of an outbreak older than we were, And when Emma asked, trembling, what we should do, I told her the only thing I could, survive tonight, even though I wanted to scream, because deep inside I knew none of us would. The forest had become something unrecognizable, a breathing organism of twisting branches, bleeding bark, and echoing screams that didn't fade with dawn anymore, and as the survivors, Maya, Gibran, Arsh, and Aisha, stumbled deeper into the cursed heart of it, they realized that night was no longer a time of day but a permanent state, a suffocating blanket of darkness that coiled around every inch of skin, every stolen breath, every flicker of hope they clung to like dying embers. They were starving, cold, hollowed out by grief, but still moving, propelled by the horrifying certainty that stopping was equivalent to letting the forest swallow them alive, and Maya could feel the children's voices gnawing behind her eyes, whispering promises of escape if she just joined them, their phantom fingers tugging at her spine, while Arsha's nerves snapped little by little. He kept muttering numbers, counting routes, counting seconds, counting what remained of sanity, until he started laughing. Uncontrollably at nothing, a jagged, broken laughter that didn't sound like him anymore, because this place didn't kill you physically first, it carved your mind into a playground for the unseen, and every time they heard branches break, they flinched violently, knowing those weren't animals or wind or coincidence, because the forest didn't have random sounds, it only had signals, warnings, movements dictated by the unseen children who were no longer tethered to the earth as ghosts but elevated as predators with instincts sharper than knives, and the deeper the survivors went, the more they saw faces forming out of bark, eyes bulging from tree trunks, mouths stretching in silent screams, frozen forever in their last moment of terror, and Maya felt like she recognized some of those faces, maybe from the missing persons posters she saw years ago, maybe from childhood, maybe from dreams, or maybe the forest could shape-shift memories themselves, because time here was fluid, inconsistent, looping, and every second they lost a part of who they were. But the real hell began when they reached the clearing, the one Arsh insisted didn't exist on any map, yet there it was, a vast pit of rotting bodies, bones stacked like architecture, skulls arranged in a spiral, and at the center, a single towering tree with exposed roots pulsing like arteries, dripping with black blood, and nailed to its trunk were hundreds of small school uniforms, each crusted with dirt, rot, and dark stains that weren't mud, and as they approached, the children's shadows began forming around them, silhouettes wavering in flickering moonlight, their voices merging into a collective whisper, chanting, "Stay, stay, stay," and the survivors saw the truth. These weren't ghosts, they were remnants, echoes of rituals performed decades ago, sacrifices to something older than the forest, something hungry, something divine in its cruelty. And suddenly the shadows lunged forward and the world ruptured into chaos. As Aisha was dragged screaming into the pit, her fingers scraping dirt as she vanished beneath skeletal hands, and Arsh, already unstable, didn't run or help, he just stared, smiled, and walked forward with open arms, mumbling finally, before the shadows enveloped him like a lover, and his body went limp, swallowed silently, while Gibran grabbed Maya and pulled her toward the burning tree roots, screaming for her to help him set it on fire, because maybe if they destroyed the source, the curse would crumble. But even as fire caught, as flames raced across bark and uniforms, lighting the forest in a violent inferno, Maya felt them, the children, screaming inside her skull, shrieking in agony, rage, betrayal, and the entire forest shook violently, trees splitting open, spilling black, viscous blood, the ground cracking beneath them as something massive stirred beneath the earth, something ancient that had been sleeping, not dead, and the burning tree exploded in a violent burst. That threw Maya backward, knocking the air from her lungs, and she watched in frozen horror as Gibran burned alive, his skin bubbling, sloughing off bone, and as he screamed, the children's voices screamed with him, as if his soul was being ripped apart and fed into the void, and Maya, blinded by heat, blood in her eyes, her ears ringing, staggered to her feet, running mindlessly through burning trees, branches falling, embers striking her skin like hot nails, and she didn't stop, not even when she heard footsteps behind her, whispering promises of comfort, of endless peace if she just surrendered, because she could feel it now. The forest wasn't hunting her to kill her, It was hunting her to crown her, to transform her into something new, something monstrous, because every survivor eventually became another guardian of the place, another voice in the wind, another ghost stuck between life and death, and by the time she burst out of the tree lean, collapsing on the roadside, skin scorched, clothes torn, lungs raw from smoke, headlights of a passing truck blinding her, she realized something awful. The forest had let her go, not because she escaped, but because it wanted a messenger, a carrier, someone who would spread the story, someone who would lure more children back, because the forest never stopped feeding, never stopped expanding, never stopped evolving, and as the driver jumped out, yelling for help, Maya finally turned her head toward the burning horizon, and through the smoke she saw dozens of small silhouettes standing at the forest's edge, perfectly still, perfectly silent, staring directly at her with hollow eyes full of hunger, as if they already knew the world outside belonged to them next. And in that moment Maya understood that what happened in that forest wasn't tragedy or accident or haunting. It was recruitment, expansion, a slow invasion beginning with one survivor and spreading like infection. And as she opened her mouth to scream, to warn, to beg, she realized she could no longer form words, because something inside her was still speaking, still whispering, and her voice came out in a chorus of children, layered and distorted, chanting the same single word over and over, "Come."